This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent, Butterworth, and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience, and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hi, and welcome to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Brent Butterworth.
And I'm Dennis Berger.
Dennis Berger is a contributing editor for the SoundStage Access website and also writes for Wirecutter and Cinelux, and used to write for Home Theater Review, Home Entertainment, and Home Theater magazines.
And Brent currently writes for SoundStage, Wirecutter, Audio Express, and Jazz Times. He's also written for Home Theater and Home Entertainment magazines. He was the editor of both at one time or another, wrote for Sound and Vision, Home Theater Review, and a lot of other publications.
Now, this is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, and so for what we think is the first time ever, we're actually trying to make a podcast according to audiophile standards. So, Dennis, since you're the technical master here, what is it we're doing?
Well, for one thing, we're recording in stereo. I think, the funny thing is we forgot to mention in the first episode that we were going to mix in stereo, and a lot of people were kind of surprised by that. A lot of people were also surprised that you and I were not in the same room. We're absolutely not. I mean, we're both in LA, but you're in Los Angeles and I'm in Lower Alabama. The first episode we recorded on Zoom and found some ways we thought we could improve it. So we are now recording locally and just using Zoom to sync up. And hopefully we're going to end up with some files that sound even better than the first episode.
Yeah, so we're originating with 16-bit 44 kilohertz wave files, mixing those together, and we're adding music done by me that is mixed in stereo and is produced in, we're taking a 1644 file, and that's the original, and then we're mixing that in. So we're starting with high quality, CD resolution files, and then mixing into whatever codec the system that you're listening on decides to use.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we should say if one of us sounds much louder than the other, it may be the fact that you're used to listening to podcasts with one earphone in. You can't do that with us. So
no, sorry, we are not mono compatible. But if you need mono, you need to probably listen to a less sophisticated podcast than ours.
Yeah. So what are we talking about this week, Brent?
So we are going to start with one of your articles that is on SoundStage Access, which is available at soundstageaccess.com, or you can just go to soundstage.com and access all the different SoundStage articles. And the article is titled The Most Dangerous Myth in Audio, whereas you're going to tell us the most horrifying, destructive thing that's happening in the world of audio.
I don't know if I'd have gone that far. Anyway, next up, we've got an article by our mutual friend Jerry Del Cagliano on Audioholics called How Art Can Teach the Stagnant World of Audio a Lesson About the Future.
I can't wait. I'm sure I will learn a lot. And then we're going to finish with a discussion about a YouTube video by Danny Richie of GR-Research. And the YouTube video is titled Calling Out the Reviewers, in mostly all caps with an exclamation point. So it must be worthy of discussion.
Yeah.
So let's move on. Dennis, what is the most dangerous myth in audio? That was kind of a softball intro, wasn't it?
That was kind of a softball intro. For the purposes of this article, you've always got to have a headline that grabs people, but at least I think I could make the case that one of the most dangerous myths in audio is this notion of golden ears. This silly notion that some people simply have access to hearing abilities that are beyond normal mortal men, that you have to train yourself how to be a listener, and that many of these audio reviewers just have access to superpowers that mortal men simply can't access.
So what's your argument with that?
Well, I mean, first off, I think it's dangerous because it's stupid, but I also think it's dangerous because, look, we're having a problem in that our hobby has become a bunch of old dudes sitting around talking to each other in an echo chamber, and for any number of reasons, we're having trouble attracting the youngins. I think this myth of the golden ear might be one of the things that's really driving them away. I mean, when we make these stupid claims that things that people can't hear, when we claim to be able to hear them, then anyone who's just coming into this is going to go, well, I can't hear that, so I must not belong to this club, or they're going to get angry about it and write our entire hobby off as just, a hoax. And
that's a good point. And so do you think is this myth dangerous to the industry, or dangerous to audiophiles, or dangerous to people who aren't audiophiles, or who is it actually dangerous to?
I think it harms our industry probably more than anything, because I think it makes it really, really hard to bring in new initiates who aren't already sort of buying into this notion that there are these people who have special superpowers in terms of hearing.
But who's to say they don't? How do you know they don't?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think they do. And I think probably the best evidence for that is that the people who claim that they do are the first to reject notions like blind testing. I mean, if you are so super confident in your superhuman hearing abilities, then why are you scared of an ABX test, And it's always the people who crow the loudest about how refined their hearing is that are the first to trash double-blind testing.
Yeah. I mean, this has always bothered me. I mean, they always say trust your ears, but they don't trust their ears. They always have to have their eyes involved. And to me, if you're going to trust your ears, the first thing to get rid of is your knowledge of what you're hearing. Then you actually do trust your ears.
Yeah.
So you got a letter from a reader about this, didn't you?
I did. I got a letter from Joe Pop. And what's fascinating about this is that it led me to another article, which I think we're going to dig into, but I'll just read some of the email from Joe. So he starts off with a headline in response to the most dangerous myth in audio. And then he goes on, but I just read Harry Pearson studied psychology at Duke University, and this is what allowed him to develop a philosophy about audio listening and reviewing that was a game changer. That philosophy? Harry's idea was that the human perceptive apparatus could be trained to objectively observe the distinctive performance characteristics of audio gear. Not only could it do this, it was also very good test equipment for that job. And he goes on to link to this article from The Absolute Sound called Philosophical Notes, Secrets You Need to Know to Be an Audiophile. Part 1, which I guess means there's a part
1.
Yeah, there's a part 2 coming. So
we can look forward to part 2.
Yeah.
Ooh,
so you need to know a lot of secrets before you can become an audiophile. So you read the article, right? I sent you a link.
I did read the article. I have so many problems with what's stated in this article, and I will state right up front that I did not know Harry Pearson, but I met him a couple times, and he was very nice to me. And he didn't have to be, because some high-end audio writers don't dig me too much. So anyway, but he was very gracious and delightful. In fact, when the first time he said, "Oh, Brent Butterworth," and then he says, "You don't look like a monster to me." And I was kind of like, "Huh?" And he said, "Oh, this other writer, whose name I won't name because he'll probably try to sue me, said you were a monster." So anyway, it's a delightful person. Anyway, so I don't think any scientist would argue that your ears are not good. Anyone with decent hearing, their ears are not good test equipment for the job. I mean, that's the whole point, is that we are trying to figure out what people can hear and what will make them happy when they listen to this stuff. So their ears are great test equipment for the job. However, in the very next sentence, he says, this is a point of contention among audiophiles, but there has been quite a bit of research showing how capable the sensory brain system of humans is and how it often outperforms electronic instrumentation. And we see this, we've been seeing this, essentially the same statement for decades thrown out there. And, this article is on the web, okay? So you can do a thing called hyperlink that all the kids are doing now.
It's all
have been doing for 25 years. But I can say there's quite a bit of research showing that nobody who writes for the Absolute Sound has any idea what they're talking about. But unless I can point to that research, my statement is invalid. So it's like, stop saying, oh, there's quite a bit of research showing blah, 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 whatever contentions that confirm your existing biases. Well, fine. link to the research. If you don't cite your research, you're making it up. That's the rule. And so that really upsets me right there, is that the guy is just, has he actually read any scientific research? I'm going to guess not. But this goes on, and it talks about how, Harry asserted that we need a standard for using one's ears, and that the standard is what he called the absolute sound, which is the sound of real acoustical instruments in a real space. And that's great, but any sort of critical thinker or anyone who knows anything about audio is going to immediately start to see what the problems are with that. And this is a 50 years old contention, and it's still being thrown out there.
I was about to say, we should probably put in context for people who aren't familiar with Pearson and the absolute sound.
We should.
This is the early 70s. This is 1973, right? So
yeah. Harry and Gordon Holt, who founded Stereophile, kind of were grappling with, like, how do we write about this? How do we describe this? How do we judge these products? And, you and I could jump in, and there are already standards. There's tons of scientific research. Even as we were getting into this, there was a lot of research emerging, and now there's just tons. So we have it kind of easy, and Harry and Gordon didn't. But this contention was made 50 years ago. And it's just, even 50 years ago, you can look at this and say, okay, there's a couple problems with this. First of all, the sound of live acoustic music played in a real space. Well, you're not comparing a system to a live musician. You're comparing it to your memory of a live musician, which you're assuming is accurate. And I'm not aware of any study that's ever been done that shows acoustic memory is terribly accurate. And
I've seen quite a few that showed it's exactly the opposite.
Sure.
So.
And to my point before, if anyone wants, we could probably drop that into some. Do we have show notes on this thing?
We do have show notes.
Okay, good. We can drop something. I can find an AES paper on that easily because I know they exist. So we'll drop that into the show notes. We're going to practice what we preach here. But there's so many other problems with it besides that your acoustic memory isn't that good. It's like, what does live acoustic music played in a real space sound like? Is that invariable? Well, it depends on the characteristics of the space. It depends on the instruments. It depends on the people playing the instruments. This is why we buy multiple recordings of a piece of music, of the same piece of music played by different people on different instruments in different eras in different spaces. Okay, they're all different. That's not a standard. And on top of that, how do you know how the instruments are supposed to sound? Yeah, I have a rough idea of what a cello sounds like because I've heard a bunch of them. I know what a saxophone sounds like, but I don't know exactly. And it's not a standard or a reference because I just don't know. I mean, what does a double bass sound like? I play double bass, and the sound of a double bass changes not only with the sound of the bass itself, but the strings are like radically different. They sound really, really different. And orchestral players do not standardize on a certain set of strings. They use a bunch of different kinds of things. Sometimes they use different strings for the E and A and for the D and G, right?
Yeah.
Seriously, which is mind-blowing to a guitar player, because a guitar player, you go buy some Ernie balls and slap them on. They sound kind of like everything else, but with double bass, they sound radically different. And then there's the bow. The bow sounds different. And that's just double bass, which is the only orchestral instrument I can speak about with any authority, even though I can't play classical double bass except badly. But anyway, that's my point, though, is that you don't really know what it sounds like. It's not a standard. But we do have standards, and we have standards like the Harman research that show you that, hey, this X percentage of people, I think it's 86% or something like that, will prefer speakers that have these characteristics. Okay, that's a standard. A standard is not like, oh, I think it's kind of like this recording of so-and-so string quartet in so-and-so space at this year is kind of similar to my memory 2 years ago of a string quartet I heard in a completely different space playing a different string quartet entirely, but it's kind of the same thing. Look, stop me if I get unhinged, okay?
I'm not going to stop you because I am entertained as hell right now.
So I tell people all the time, because I have a bunch of instruments in my den where I have people over for jam sessions and stuff, and so I own a drum kit and cymbals and things like that. And cymbals are really hard to reproduce. A lot of, especially headphones, get them wildly wrong. They make them way too bright, or they make them too dull, or whoever. And so I always tell people, go to Guitar Center and borrow a stick from them and just tap on a few cymbals there. There's a ton of cymbals. And you can hear the giant range of sound within cymbals, but you also get an idea of what they really sound like. And then you can kind of translate that a little bit. It helps. And certainly in acoustic guitars are the same way. Go hear some acoustic guitars, not you playing them, somebody else playing them, so that you're actually like where the microphone is, and see what they sound like. Again, there's a wide range of them, but you have some kind of a rough idea. I mean, the sort of twangy, super, super edgy sound that you hear on some acoustic guitar recordings through some speakers, you can go, is not on the instrument. That's just not what they sound like.
Yeah.
Can I stop ranting and you take over for a while?
Well, something that has come to mind that I didn't think to discuss before is I don't want to in any way be seen as denigrating Harry Pearson. He's a legend in our industry.
Yeah.
I disagree with a lot of his philosophy, but the one lasting effect that I think he has had, more so than any other, is I think he almost single-handedly defined what is today perceived to be proper audiophile music. You need to be listening to blah, 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 piano concerto, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what that should sound like. No, I know what, Allman Brothers Band, Brothers and Sisters should sound like. I know what, Grateful Dead live recording should sound like. I don't actually enjoy chamber music, so I don't listen to a ton of it on a bunch of different gears, so I have no basis for comparison. And yeah, I kind of think that's putting the cart before the horse. I think there's this thing where once you become really embedded in this hobby, you are supposed to develop this taste in music that follows Harry Pearson from 50 years ago. And to me, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. I listen to what I enjoy,
That's
and I want it to sound as good as it can.
Yeah, look, classical music is recorded typically pretty well. It's recorded with maybe a stereo microphone pair and a few other microphones, typically in a real, performance space, but it could be a small hall. It could be Carnegie Hall. It could be all sorts of different halls, and they all sound different. But even if you take all of that combined, classical music is 1% of record sales or 1% of the, music industry. And so the vast majority of what people are listening to is not classical music. And I don't think that, say, a string quartet is going to tell you a whole lot about vocal reproduction. It doesn't hurt. It's good to listen to that. But, the Harman guys actually researched this and found that things like Tracy Chapman's Fast Car and Jennifer Warnes' Bird on a Wire are the best things that give the most consistent and repeatable and in-depth sort of results. And that's what I tend to use a lot of stuff like that, in addition to string quartets, in addition to hip-hop or whatever, because I don't know what my readers are going to be listening to. So
yeah.
I think that the whole notion is sort of pretending, and maybe in 1973 or whatever that was, you could say, classical was still like a really big deal. And like, if you look at the old stereo reviews from back then, there was a big focus on classical. But, the sophisticated listeners that listened to FM radio back then listened to classical, because there wasn't a pop on FM back then. I'm old enough to remember that. And so I can see his point then, just to a large extent. It's like, okay, yeah, sophisticated listeners were going to listen to classical and things like that. And a lot of the rock recordings were fairly execrable at the time. But that's not the case now. And classical music is a small part of the music world, and most people are not going to be listening to that. And jazz is not recorded that way, by the way. Jazz is not performed that way. I can think of the fully acoustical jazz performances I've seen. I could probably count on one hand. And I do remember I saw at Caravan of Dreams in Fort Worth, I saw Stan Getz perform in the 80s. And Rufus Reid was on bass. And for the last tune, they actually turned off the PA and they just performed acoustically, which was really cool. But it didn't sound like what we think jazz sounds like. You could barely hear the double bass.
Yeah.
So,
but, tying that back to what we were saying, I think a lot of people in our hobby pretend to enjoy music that they don't really enjoy. And I think you can tie a lot of that back to Harry Pearson.
I don't know. That's a good point of contention. I'm not going to take a stand on that. Rare case where I don't have an opinion. But anyway, let's move on to the next segment, shall we? So let's take a little break right now.
Let's do it. Yeah, we'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm here with Brent Butterworth.
And I'm here with Dennis Berger.
Now we're going to dig into an article from Audioholics from our friend Jerry Del Cagliano called How Art Can Teach the Stagnant World of Audio a Lesson About the Future.
So what did Jerry have to say about this concept? And we should say who Jerry is. Jerry is a guy who's been involved in, he's not really involved in audio publishing. He's writing for Audioholics.com now, but he used to he started the Audio Video Revolution website, and then he started the Home Theater Review website, which we both worked for.
Yeah. So the article, it's kind of hard to wrap my brain completely around it, but basically what he does is start with a discussion of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And what's going on in the art world right now with artists selling their art digitally to people with these NFTs. And he's trying to find basically some relevance in that to the world of audio, high fidelity audio reproduction. Because I think we would both agree it is not necessarily as popular a hobby as it once was.
Audio, not art. Not art.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean high fidelity audio. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's talking about the NFTs, and he's talking about how basically, what it boils down to is I think Jerry is saying, hey, people are talking about art because of NFTs, and what can we do to make the same thing happen for audio? It seems to me to be where he's going with it.
Well, I think I'm looking at the article now, and I think he's talking about, he's comparing, audiophiles spending $30,000 on a pair of speaker cables to someone spending several thousand on an NFT that's just a digital something or another that kind of sort of represents something you'd probably have to. It's so bizarre and almost nonsensical. I think I have to disagree that, if you spend $30,000 on a pair of speaker cables, you're getting a pair of speaker cables at least, and you're getting a pair of speaker cables that cost, the $30,000 pair of speaker cables. You can argue about whether or not they make a difference in sound, but they definitely did not cost, $50 to make. All right.
Right.
They cost a lot. A lot of times they have custom plugs, they have custom parts, they have custom wound cables, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the production cost on these is not nothing. Mm-hmm. And the marketing cost is high. And so you're getting something. Whereas with an NFT, it's sort of vaporware-ish to me. And I'm not sure that so I think maybe he's a little off on that. I'm sure he could explain it at length.
maybe we should have him on a future episode of the podcast to explain. But yeah, I mean, look, here's my basic understanding of NFTs, and someone can write in and tell me I'm wrong. But basically, the best analogy that I've heard is, imagine you've got the Mona Lisa and you put a price tag on the Mona Lisa. Buying an NFT is like buying the price tag. Right? You don't own the painting, but you own the price tag,
Yeah.
And I mean, you're basically owning sort of bragging rights to a piece of digital content that could be easily copied and distributed, but you can say, no, I own it and I can do whatever I want with it.
Which I guess is analogous to cables in that when you're buying $30,000 cables, you're kind of buying bragging rights. Whether it's to someone else, you're probably not going to go, those cables cost me $30,000, but maybe it's just to yourself, and that counts.
Maybe.
But further on in the article, he goes into sort of ranting a little bit about sort of old style gear, vintage style gear, things like, non-oversampling digital to analog converters and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I think he's got something of a point. You and I have we've complained about people promoting, really outdated audio technologies that don't work all that well as somehow superior to today's audio technologies. And in almost every case, that reflects ignorance on the part of the person making the claim, rather than any serious investigation on the part of that person. Although I think, honestly, there are exceptions. I mean, would I prefer a Dynaco Stereo 70 amp, tube amp, and a pair of BBC LS35A monitors, either the old original ones or one of the new recreations? Would I prefer that to, a set of nice, perfect Rebel speakers with a nice Parasound amp or something? Well, kind of. Would it sound better? No. Would I dig it more? Yeah, I might. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like those speakers are bad. I mean, they're BBC. They're designed by the BBC. They don't color the sound. They do color the sound, but they don't color the sound in a horrible way.
Yeah.
So I think he's got some points here. But people, look, you can go to Audioholics and read the article.
Yeah. I think the best point that he is making is that we do need to embrace new technologies. And you've already underlined all of the reasons why. But I think when you get right down to it, there is a sort of old boys club mentality about our hobby that, for all the reasons we've discussed, is, I think, scaring people off. So. Oh,
I think so. But, some of that ties into the vintage thing, and that, a lot of people, as my friend Gordon Soak said, the guy who runs a Innovative Audio up in Vancouver, a big vintage audio store, said a lot of people want to own gear that is either what they owned when they were a kid or like what they owned when they were a kid. And they get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And, who am I to say that, if your dad had some old, Pioneer, or those wacky Pioneer speakers with the white woofers and stuff. Who am I? If you want a pair of, those are bad speakers. They're really bad speakers. That was made before they knew how to make speakers. And you just look at the baffle layout with the drivers on it. You're like, here's why acoustically that doesn't work. But back then they didn't know. They were shoving drivers in there and hoping it sounded good. And but music is about emotion, Dennis. Did you know this? And I did. I'm told this by many audiophile dudes. And music is about emotion. And it's the combined emotion of listening to the music and what your audio gear is. So if you're listening to music on audio gear that's reminiscent of the stuff that your dad had, maybe, or maybe your first system when you were a kid, that's a positive emotional reaction. And you can put on whatever music you want, which I would hope also inspires a positive emotional reaction. And it's a good thing. You have a positive emotional reaction, and that's why people are into this stuff in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you talk about the Pioneer speakers with the big white woofers. I had I had a system with those for a while that was loaned to me when I was a teenager. But the funny thing is, you were talking about the memories and the nostalgia. I remember that system was probably my first experience with a really, really big, chunky, inertial volume knob. And that was a revelation for me. And I think to this day, that's why I love gear with big, beefy volume knobs. I rarely use remote controls in my stereo setup because I like touching the gear and I like interacting with it. I love just scooching the volume knob just a little. And I think all of that goes back to, my formative days.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't know if Jerry would agree or disagree. Well, I'll tell you what, how about if we take a break here and we'll go on to topic number 3?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, we're back. This is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast with Dennis Berger
And Brent Butterworth.
And so we are going to finish up by talking about a really, really, I think, provocative YouTube video that was done by Danny Richie, who is he's the principal of GR-Research. Mm-hmm. And if you're into audio, I don't care if you're into an audiophile, I don't care if you're into pro audio, maybe even car audio, I don't know. You should go check out the GR-Research YouTube channel, because Danny is an actual speaker designer. And he gets really deep into speakers. And speakers are what really matters. Speakers are going to really dictate the sound of your system. And he goes into, he'll do teardowns of very well-known speakers and show you what's wrong with them and where they either cheaped out on the design or screwed up the design. And that is key to being an expert on audio, is understanding how speakers work. So
he sometimes improves them. I've seen him improve speakers.
Oh, yeah. And he'll show you how to do it. And, for nothing. And so Danny has this YouTube video that is called "Calling Out the Reviewers" with an exclamation point. So what did he say in this video?
Yeah, well, for the most part, I think he's sort of destroying the print model of or trying to, at least, or
print.
Maybe we should say
print is when you put like ink on paper.
Well, I think it would also extend to websites as well, but he's calling out magazines and websites because he he says we're all corrupt. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it. He's basically saying,
did I ever say I wasn't?
That's true. So he's basically saying that, I think he's saying the reason I don't send my products out for review, well, it's a two-part reason. One, because then the magazine would want him to advertise, and if he didn't advertise, they wouldn't review it. And also he claims that, he thinks that YouTube reviewers are way more innocent and wholesome and not corrupt at all, but they're just not ready. They can't really hear the differences in his speaker designs. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the issue of corruption is, I don't know, that's the one that stood out to me the most,
Well, I think he misses an opportunity here. And as I kind of suggested, reviewers by and large don't understand how speakers work, and that's the most important thing in audio, unless you're listening to headphones. And he really could have dug in and said, "Hey, look, here's this speaker. I mean, you can look at Issues of Stereophile and you can see John Atkinson's measurements, and he will call it out and say, hey, you know what? This speaker's got a lot of problems." And sometimes he'll say, I don't know why the writer didn't hear him. And the writer will go, oh my gosh, this is highly recommended. It's fantastic. And it's got like these colossal flaws in it. So he could have made a much better case, I think, than he did. But speaking as someone who has probably worked for, 6 or 7 or 8 audio or audio-related publications, and also done marketing consulting, marketing writing and consulting for, I'm sure 15 different audio companies, and who also worked as a marketing director for Dolby Labs and who bought ads. I think I can speak to this subject with as much authority as probably anyone on the planet, since I've been in all those different worlds. And I can tell you that he's right in some cases and wrong in some cases. Now, there are, from having worked with manufacturers and having helped them plan their evil scheme of getting a good review for their product, I can tell you that there are publications, and by publications I mean print publications, websites, YouTube reviewers, etc., where there is a definite demand that you pay to play. In other words, they will say, I am going to charge you this much if you want to get a review. Mm-hmm. And I would prefer, for legal reasons, not to name any names because I can't document any of this stuff, but there are quite a few of them are like that. Some of them are really upfront about it, and some of them are kind of honest about it. And some of them don't guarantee you a good review. Now, some of them will tell you, like, okay, you're going to get a review. And they don't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be good. But look at some of these high-end audio publications, okay? How many bad reviews are there in these publications? If you look at, actually, Jeff Fritz, our editor-in-chief, in the latest edition of SoundStage Ultra edition, it's a website. So, whatever you call that, the latest on it right now, he's got a column that talks about how most of the reviews, it's like, hey, reviewer was interested in a product. He asked for the product. They sent it to him. He listened to it, and it's really good. Cut and paste.
Yeah.
and Danny Richie kind of suggests the same thing in his thing. So there's that problem is that there's a lot of publications, like you don't see any negative reviews in those publications. So you assume they're going to give you a nice review, right?
Yeah.
However, I'm going to tell you right up front that I've worked for a lot of magazines, and I've seen that in some of them I've never worked for one where there was really hardcore pressure to deliver a good review for some advertiser.
Can I chime in here because
sure. Why don't you chime in?
I don't want to name names again because I don't want to.
I'm going to start naming names, by the way.
I'm not naming names, but
go ahead.
I had a publisher come to me over a decade ago and say, "Hey, here's this product. I need you to give me a really good review of this product," and I took that at face value and I busted my butt. It was one of the most thorough evaluations I've ever done. And I found some flaws. There was a new room correction system in it. It was really, really awful. But I dotted all of my I's and I crossed all of my T's. And I ended up with a review that was very, very, maybe 60-40, 60% good, things I liked about it, 40%, hey, there's some issues. And I turned it in and the publisher came to me and said, we had a misunderstanding. I told you that I needed a good review. And I was like, this is one of the best reviews I've ever written. Like, I really, really put my heart and soul into this. And he was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I needed a positive review. We're trying to get them as an advertiser. And I quit the next day. So,
wow.
But I have to say though, that's really rare, man. Most of the publications that I've written for have really, really high ethical standards. Now, I will say this, and I'm not trying to, toot anybody's horn here. Very few publications I've ever written for have ethical standards as high as SoundStage do. But most of them have had very, very high ethical standards. So,
yeah. Now, I have to say, okay, SoundStage, I will say, I will confess their ethical standards are actually even higher than mine. Because I'm willing to cover. It's like somebody's advertising. Okay, well, let's cover them. I mean, if you're not going to cover the advertiser, well, then why are they advertising in your publication? If they're advertising in your publication, they're probably relevant to what your readers are doing anyway. So yeah. I don't have a problem with that, but they've never, they have a couple brands that Doug, our founder, and Jeff, our editor-in-chief, they have a couple brands they like. They might ask me about once in a while just because they are really into those brands. And like if somebody has if there's a new set of Focal headphones, they both really like Focal. So they might go hey, have you tried those? But that's because they're Focal fans, not because Focal said advertise. But yeah, I'm going to call out Stereophile because I have to say I've worked with manufacturers who've had products reviewed in Stereophile, and there were some that kind of felt like if I advertise with them, at least I'll be on their radar, and it's kind of a goodwill thing. But there was never any coverage offered for advertising that I ever heard about, and I work with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And also, their big frustration was like, well, I send them, it takes me a year to get a review in there. So it's it's not that useful to me because they take so long to do it because they have a really thorough process that involves measurements, which means you got to ship gear around to different people and go through all this stuff. And, when I see people criticizing some of these magazines and just lumping them all together, that is wrong. To say that some of them are corrupt, yes, that is correct. There is one publication that I resigned from just because when I found out that the owner of it was selling my reviews, basically, and I was getting paid something like $5,000 a review. No, $500 a review, right? Which is,
I was about to say,
no, 5,000. Where do I get that good? But I was getting like $500 for a review or something like that. And, hey, fine. he was selling them for $8,000, and it was not like he was saying, "Hey, if you advertise with us, we'll make sure you get a couple reviews," which I wouldn't care. But he was saying, "You want these reviews, you have to spend this much, and it will cost you this much for these reviews." And I quit. Yeah. He copied, and I didn't find this out, surreptitiously. He copied me on an email to a manufacturer, and I quit instantly because I'm just like, I'm not allowing my reviews to be sold. That reflects really poorly on me. Life's too short to deal with that kind of nonsense. So, but I don't have kids, and all I got is a dog, and I don't have an expensive house payment. So I'm kind of a little jaded. But
one of the things though that Danny talks about in his calling out the reviewers video is the issue of reviewers selling gear, and I thought that was hilarious because. Yeah, man, I feel like I spend an inordinate amount of time begging manufacturers to take gear back from me. Like, please send me a call tag. Please take this amplifier out of my house. Look, there is gear around. I'm looking at my 2-channel system right now, and none of the gear in it did I purchase. I have to be honest with you. But the thing is, like, so much gear ends up just never going back to the manufacturer. Why wouldn't I use it? And the other thing is, like, I can never sell it because it's not mine. I don't own it. It's just sort of, I'm its caretaker for a while.
So I have, right now in my dining room, I have, which hasn't been dined in a long time, I have 10 boxes of speakers that have to go back that I'm waiting for call tags on. I write for Wirecutter, and of course, Wirecutter, you just review a colossal pile of gear. So I have a lot more than most people do. And I probably have, 10 or so, Bluetooth speakers sitting here. And then I have another 10 sets of headphones for SoundStage. So I got piles of this stuff. I don't want any of it. I will say, I have, I knew a really old school reviewer way back in the day, and I don't know if he's even still alive. And he actually wrote for a newspaper rather than an audio site. But I think he wrote some for audio publication. I know he wrote some for audio publications as well, but he was notorious for basically selling review samples. So I know it does happen. And there was another writer who I employed for a while, and I later found out after I did not terminate him. He quit before I was able to. But I tried. But anyway, I later found out from my other employees that he was selling his samples. He was selling the review samples. So,
wow.
So it does happen. And in fact,
it does happen.
I will confess, I have sold 2 review samples in my life. They were both from both amplifiers, and they were both things that I had on loan from the manufacturer, and they'd gone out of business. And I'd had the thing sitting around for like 2-3 years after that. And I'm kind of like, I guess I could sell it. And then but I used the money to buy more gear. I made a point of using the money to buy myself, usually lab gear.
I can see it when the company goes out of business. But I have had manufacturers. I've had manufacturers contact me before and be like, "Hey, do you still have that amp?" And it's 6 years after I did the review, and I'm like, "Yeah, of course I still have the amp." They're like, "We want that back." I'm like, "Yeah, finally."
Yeah,
but you know what?
I got one now that's busted, and I've had it for like 10 years, and I guess I could contact the company. Maybe I still have the box or not, but they don't want it back. I don't know what to do with it. I guess I could give it to somebody to fix or throw away. I don't need it. Yeah. But it's just sort of, this stuff just clogs your house up. And I always tell people the best way to bribe me is to put a prepaid return shipping label in with the product. Because then they can't, I work for Wirecutter, so Wirecutter doesn't let you keep any review samples at all. Except for the ones you're going to use on an ongoing basis to compare to other things. Right. And so everything has to go back. And,
yeah. One of the other things that Danny talks about in his video is like I said, he seems to think that YouTube gear reviewers are not prone to corruption. Although I think I know of at least one who is pretty well known for turning around and selling gear, but he says that he won't send his speakers to YouTubers to review because they're not ready yet. They don't know what to listen for, and their systems are not good, or their systems aren't good enough. They don't have the right acoustical treatments because he can see their room, when he's watching them on YouTube. And I don't know, man. It's just like that gatekeeping bullcrap it goes right back to what I said before about, I mean, it's making it seem like this hobby of ours is for a special select few, who have gone through the wizard training and have earned their hat and what have you. And it really bothers me. So.
Well, and plus, I mean, like, look at the YouTubers. I mean, look at, Steve Guttenberg. I mean, he's got, granted, Steve and I don't always agree about audio, but he's always had rooms that were pretty well set up, and I listened a lot in his old space, and a lot over a couple decades, I guess. And his systems always sounded pretty good, and acoustically the rooms were not bad. Certainly, pretty good. And look at a newer guy. I mean, Joe Mariano. I mean, he's really into it, and he does a really good job. And I think that he's doing some measurements, and he's really kind of digging in and trying to be like a serious evaluation guy. And I'm starting to refer people to his reviews and stuff. And to generalize and say YouTubers are this, YouTubers are that is just wrong. Because, by the way, I know there's another YouTuber, and his name is Danny Richie. So,
yeah,
who it looks to me like the guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Well, except on the issue of power chords, I think I might have disagreements with.
Well, let's put it this way: on speakers, he's about as good as it's going to get.
God, yeah, I've learned so much from his channel, and we should say, yeah, we're beating him up a little bit here, but man, if you guys aren't subscribed to the GR-Research channel, you should subscribe today because you will learn more about speaker design than you ever thought there was to know.
I'll put it to you this way: if you really want to learn a lot about speakers, you could Google my name and speakers, and probably through a lot of work, assemble enough articles to tell you what you need to know. Or you can read the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook by Vance Dickinson, which is very technical, and it's pretty heavy lifting. Or you can page through John Atkinson's Measurements in Stereophile, where he meticulously explains everything and how the measurements correlate to the speaker design and everything. But you'll have to go back through 2 or 3 years worth of stereophiles and read those measurement sections. They're all online. You can do that. Or you can just go to Danny's channel and watch a few of those. You're probably going to learn the whole thing in a matter of a couple of hours.
He's one of the few channels that I have rung the bell on his channel. I don't know if people know what that means, but like when you ring the bell on a channel, that means you get notifications when they post a new video. And it's like the instant he posts something, I want to know about it because most of his videos are fascinating.
Yeah, so highly recommended. I disagree with him on some of these things, and frankly, I have much better standing to make these statements. But you should, if you're into audio, that is extremely high on my list of channels you need to be checking out. That might be at the top.
Yeah. So I think we've covered some good ground this week, Brent.
Good, and some bad ground as well.
Are we ready to wrap this up?
Yeah, I'm ready. Are you? I'm totally ready. And so you have been listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast in genuine, actual, living stereo.
Yeah. We should do the next episode in synth surround.
We could.
Yeah. Do we want to do some credits?
Yeah, let's do some credits.
You've been listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast with Dennis Berger and
Brent Butterworth.
We are a production of the SoundStage Network. Gosh, what else are we going to say?
Oh, we could talk about the music, which is done by me with my friends Dan Gonda and Ron Seiger.
Absolutely. We could talk about the engineering and the editing, which is done by me, Dennis.
And the mixing, which I guess will be done by me, except you've probably learned to use Reaper by now, so you probably don't need me anymore.
You know, I kind of still need you.
Okay.
I need you to do the EQ, and I need you to do the compression, so...
Okay.
Yeah.
I just put it through presets anyway.
well, hey, you've already got the presets done, so that means you're stuck with the job for the time
I
being.
just use whatever the first preset is in all those plugins.
Nice. Boy, we've got standards, don't we?
Yeah, so this is going through the death metal preset or something like that.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.